today is an update of the Washington State Energy Strategy. We've had a comprehensive project underway with the Department of Commerce to update the state energy strategy. And with that, I'll invite Michael and Glenn from the Department of Commerce to introduce themselves and to walk us through. And again, in recognizing the time, asking you to take about 15, 20 minutes, and then we want to leave so that we have time for questions afterwards. With that, good morning and welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Michael Furs, and I'm an assistant director at the Department of Commerce. The team that I lead is our energy division, and Glenn Blackman, who is leader for the policy office, is with me here today. Chair Carlisle, committee members, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about the soon to be completed 2021 state energy strategy. Next slide, please. As you know, Commerce has got a diverse portfolio, and that is something that enables us to partner effectively with communities across the state. Our work spans from affordable housing to supporting international trade. Under Director Brown's leadership, we've played a key role in response to the pandemic, distributing over $800 million in CARES Act funding to get it out to needed activities across the state. And all this puts us in a unique position to partner with different communities to help achieve the state's clean energy future. Next slide, please. So in 2019, the legislature asked us to develop a new state energy strategy as part of CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act that was passed in 2019. And there were two key elements as part of the work that we need to do for the state energy strategy. The first is to meet the requirements of CETA as it relates to clean electricity. And the second is to meet the state greenhouse gas emissions targets. And the good news is that we can do it. We need to rethink how we use energy in all aspects of our economy, and we need to hustle, but we can do it. The change is one that's akin to a fundamental shift in how we use energy, and it's one that can be hard to imagine. And so for me, I like to think back and look at similar shifts that I can understand in my lifetime, from textbook to e-reader, from landline to smartphone. And then given the breadth of your committee, Mr. Chair, think about the internet, which 30 years ago was being deployed outside of the Defense Department for the first time, and it's now bringing us together safely in the pandemic on platforms like Zoom. So that's the type of shift that we are thinking through when it comes to the state energy strategy. Next slide, please. And we can do it while considering these cross-cutting realities of Washington's clean energy economy, the need for fair prices, for sufficient supply of electricity and energy, for workforce development needs. We also need to think differently about how we address the needs of low-income and vulnerable populations in ways that we have not done before. And we need to do that while accounting for and responding to the differences between the urban and rural communities in our state. Next slide. We can achieve the goals that you laid out for us in the state energy strategy thanks to the composition of our state energy strategy advisory committee, which was expanded since the last time we did this over a decade ago. And I want to provide some special thanks to two members of your committee who brought your expertise and perspective to help shape our strategy, Senator Sheldon and Chair Carlisle. It's a lot of work to develop a state energy strategy. Thank you for your time and your energy. I'm going to turn it over to Glenn on the next slide, and he's going to talk about the approach that Commerce has taken to the state energy strategy.
Thank you, Michael. And so I'm going to briefly go over the framework for the energy strategy analysis itself. Next slide, please. This illustrates kind of the energy flows within our economy today. On the left, you see the different forms of energy that are used in the state, and the size of the box corresponds to how much of that form of energy that we use. You see petroleum is the largest, and natural gas is the second largest. And then those two, along with coal, are the primary sources of our greenhouse gas emissions. The strategy is organized around the pink boxes over on the right-hand side. Those are the end-use sectors, the different activities where we use energy. And you can see over there that transportation is our biggest energy use in the state. And it if you look at this on a carbon emissions basis, it's even more predominant because basically no renewable energy today is being used for transportation, or very little. And then in addition to these four end-use areas, we look at electricity generation, which is the goldenrod box toward the top. So those are the kind of the way the energy strategy is organized. Next slide, please. And then the targets that we're trying to meet are illustrated with the red dots in this chart over time. You see the 2020 level that we're at today, which is kind of our starting point. And then under the statutory emissions reduction limits, we need to achieve a 45% reduction by 2030, and then essentially reach a net zero emissions level by 2050. The bar chart on the left shows where the emissions are in terms of the sectors. You see electricity at the top, where CETA is already putting us on a track to eliminate those emissions over time. And then transportation becomes even more prominent in terms of where we need to do our work. The darker blue section at the bottom of that chart represents non-energy uses or emissions in the economy. Those are not addressed in the energy strategy, and they represent an area where we have to drive energy-related emissions even further because of the existence of those non-energy emissions. Next slide, please. We analyzed this problem using a deep decarbonization pathway framework. This is an analytical method that we've used in the state before. You've seen a number of presentations from different groups over the years using this framework, where you try to reach a certain outcome, such as an emissions reduction level, by looking across every conceivable use of energy within the state and the technologies that are available and the costs of those technologies, and try to find the path through there that meets your objectives. By far, the primary objective in any one of these is to meet those emissions reductions and to find the least cost method of doing that. I won't go through all of these different scenarios, but you do see that we look at it with different alternatives in mind that have a different emphasis on different paths toward that future. And you see that here that in any of the scenarios that we look at, over time, we need to use more electricity in our grid. That turns out to be a really fundamental conclusion of the strategy. Next slide, please. In addition to that energy modeling that I just described, we also were able to do some economic modeling to look at the likely effect of this strategy on the state's economy and workforce. And we consulted with a great number of technical experts beyond those on the advisory committee itself during this process. So that's a kind of an overview of the analytical framework itself. And now we're going to talk about some of the key strategies that are in the current draft. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So one of the central focus efforts that we had in the state energy strategy was thinking about how we can do this equitably. Equity played a much larger role than in past strategies. And part of that is due to the fact that the Environmental Justice Task Force work that you'll be hearing about directly after us was going on both before and simultaneously to the strategy process. And so we were able to learn a lot and borrow from the work there around community engagement and community mapping to help think through different ways to make the transition to the clean energy future in Washington more equitable. In addition to that, thinking through how we can support workers through this transition and sort of process elements for how we can work with different stakeholders to work through the details of implementing the ideas that are in the state energy strategy. All of that came from work that we shared with our colleagues at the Environmental Justice Task Force. In addition to that, maybe not entirely surprising given the way that we're communicating today, but the need for universal broadband access came through as a clear equity marker in our state energy strategy, both in terms of connecting people and connecting the type of technology that we will need to build out over the next 30 years. And I know that you'll hear more today from our colleague, Russ Elliott. Next slide, please.
In the electricity sector, it's become very important in this work that we strengthen and expand the electricity sector that we have. It plays a much larger role in our energy system in the future. It's a way that we can take renewable and non-emitting energy and use it in applications where today we need gasoline or natural gas, fossil fuels in some form other than electricity. So to do that, we need to add renewable generation, and we need to expand and strengthen the transmission system so that we can draw resources from a much broader area than just the state of Washington. The electric grid needs to be more flexible so that we can adjust our energy consumption, our loads, rather than having to turn on and turn off fossil fuel plants the way we manage the grid today. We need to make more use of market mechanisms so that we can get clean power at the lowest possible cost. And through all of this, we need to protect and enhance resource adequacy, which is one of the fundamental tenets of CETA. Next slide, please.
So Glenn alluded to the type of transformation that's going to happen in our transportation sector when he showed the diagram earlier in our presentation. I think that he said that right now there's not a lot of renewable energy that's being used in the transportation sector, and we think that's going to change quite a bit over the next 30 years. And in fact, there's a lot of work to do in the next 10 years to achieve the emissions targets that the state has. We're going to need to move people and goods more efficiently. And in order to get there, we're probably going to need to set targets and establish accountability mechanisms in order to move forward. Next slide, please.
The building sector includes our homes and our businesses, office buildings, anything that's not, like a factory, but it's where we use energy for heat, lighting, water heating, things like that. And the key message for the building sector is heat pumps. High efficiency heat pumps are a technology that has made just tremendous progress over the years and is ready for deployment in many different applications, whether it's heating water or heating the space in a building. And so, of course, those would use electricity and use it at much higher efficiency levels than what we would use to natural gas today in a furnace or a water heater. We also need to develop standards for new buildings and for existing buildings. And then we need to make the investments in the existing stock of buildings in order to remove the CO2 emissions from those buildings through efficiency and conversion to non-emitting energy forms. Next slide, please.
And in the industrial sector, I think the opportunity is to achieve Washington's potential as a global leader in the clean energy economy. It gives us the opportunity to build on part of the array of industries in our state. And each industry that we have may require their own kind of appropriate pathway to participate in the clean energy future. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And we think the next step there is thinking about improving the data and analytical capabilities that we have as a state that will enable us to fine-tune a clean energy industrial policy. Next slide.
And one more, please.
So the work of the strategy is not over. Our final public hearing is next Monday, December 7th. And from there, when the strategy is finalized and transmitted by the end of the year, then a different set of work begins to kind of identify and prioritize near-term actions that will help move us forward to the 2030 outcomes that we have in statute. We need to figure out kind of the roles and responsibilities and how to distribute the work amongst the participants. And we need to include communities in that in a way that we have done differently in getting the frontline perspective from vulnerable populations about how we should implement some of the ideas that are part of the state energy strategy and how they can benefit from those ideas. And we need to do this while recognizing the limitations that we have within the pandemic. And with that, more work will begin in 2021. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a high-level overview of the state energy strategy.